Hello and welcome to the Scramble. Today we discuss mass shootings, how America views guns, and the aftermath after the Parkland shooting. Lastly, we will discuss mental health and its role in gun violence, and should open carry be allowed on college campuses? Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Sarah Coker, and this is the Scramble. On February 14th, 17 people were killed and 15 more were injured at Stoneman Douglas High School after 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz entered the school with an AR-15. In the aftermath of this massacre, student survivors have created a group called Never Again. The group has demanded that government take action to prevent future mass shootings. Survivor and key figure in the Never Again movement, Emma Gonzalez, said in her speech that she does not want to hear thoughts and prayers from the government. And if they did care, they would take legislative action. Students at the school also went to the state capitol in Tallahassee, where the Florida House of Representatives rejected a bill that would ban assault weapons. The group has criticized this vote, especially after House of Representatives passed a bill declaring pornography as a public health risk. We also saw massive criticism of companies and political figures who have received money from the National Rifle Association, also known as the NRA. Companies like Delta Airlines are withdrawing discounts for NRA members. Their CEO, Ed Bastian, says, "Our objective in removing any implied affiliation with the NRA was to remove Delta from the debate." We also had social media campaigns blowing up from both sides of the debate on gun control when Dick's Sporting Goods announced that they would no longer sell assault rifle firearms nor sell guns to anyone under 21. It is important to note that everyone wants mass shootings and gun violence to come to an end. But the question is how to solve it. In 2017, the U.S. had a total of 346 mass shootings, those being defined as injury or death to 4 or more people by guns. This is more than any country in the world. The U.S. also has the most gun ownership. Americans own about 42% of the world's guns. While many on the left believe banning guns is the solution, people from the right argue it's not the guns. In fact, a common saying is the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, as well as criminals will still find a way to get their hands on guns regardless if there's a ban. And finally, they want to protect the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. While gun ownership is a right, where and how they can be carried is up for debate. UNLV is a gun-free zone, however, it's also an open campus, meaning if someone was to walk on campus with a concealed weapon, there would be no way of knowing. Should students and staff be allowed to have open carry on college campuses? 10 states currently allow it, but how would UNLV students feel about this? And what is responsible for gun violence in America? Can it be attributed to the lack of legislation on federal or state level, improper background checks, the normalization of guns? Is it the mentally ill or the overtly violent? We will discuss this with our panel. Thank you for staying with us. I am joined by sophomore political science major Carl Catarata and junior journalism major Jasmine Bryant. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to open the discussion with you, Jasmine. I want to talk about the companies first and their withdrawal from the gun control debate.
Mm-hmm.
Should political companies be making political statements, and is it okay?
I would definitely say yes. I think that we should applaud Dick's Sporting Goods and other companies like it that have taken a stance. I don't believe that's the whole, what they've done is I think it's only one part of the solution. I think if you look at their statement, they said that they, thoughts and prayers aren't enough, echoing what Emma Gonzalez said, who is a survivor of the Parkland shooting and also attends there. They also, after Sandy Hook, they limited assault weapons. So there is precedent there. They did not enough at that time, and now they're unfortunately at the end after this shooting, they took more action. So I think that is good, and I think they should be applauded for it.
Carl, your thoughts?
So I would agree with that, just because of the fact that private companies and private organizations do have the right to release any or whatever statements that they would like to. Right. So Dick's Sporting Goods, being a corporate company, was within their complete constitutional right to release a statement. in which what their company would be selling and not be selling to the public. So as a student activist, I completely agree with them. And I mean, I've shopped at Dick's Sporting Goods all the time, and this whole entire ban won't stop me from my customer satisfaction at their stores.
Yeah.
So
I plan on buying some rollerblades, so.
yeah.
You mentioned that it's a first step, but is it enough? Would you recommend companies going in the same direction?
I would. I think that is, again, only one part of the solution. I think that a big thing is the narrative and how America fetishizes, something that Carl actually were talking about before, how America in general fetishizes military and guns in this country. This isn't, like we said, this isn't the first shooting. Sandy Hook happened, when was that, 2012, I want to say?
Probably.
It's been 6 years since that's happened, and we've had shootings all over the country, especially, and then we just recently had one here on October 1st. And I want to say also, just this past week, we found 3 guns in 3 different schools here in the city. I encourage everyone to look up those events that have happened. 2 guns, I believe, one being a BB gun, was found in 3 different schools just in the city this past week. And we've had the shooting of a trans woman of color at, I think it was a lounge or a bar that has not had any very little media attention. So I think it's not just a talk about guns, it's about violence and how we combat violence.
And Carl, I'm going to pass it to you. Do you think that this will change gun violence in any way? Is raising the age, is banning, or not banning firearms, but choosing not to sell it, will that change anything? Or are people just going to go to the next store?
So yes, I mean, looking at this whole entire situation, looking at all the situations across the United States, I mean, multitude things could happen. So I completely agree with you that like and specifically who were the perpetrators of the thing was students. I believe that in terms of America where it is right now, I mean, customers could go to another store. Customers could seek other companies or organizations or small businesses that can seek completely easily.
Yeah.
Stores that don't have that 21 years and older. When it comes to looking at what this means for the country, I mean, studying political science and hopefully one day being a political scientist, this is the turning point in America. This is where the youth are really saying that enough is enough, as we see it with lead organizations like the Women's March, the Brady Campaign, Every Town for Gun Safety, and even right now with, again, Never Again MSD, which were created by students, Cameron Kasky and Emma Gonzalez. We are now seeing a turning point where the younger generations are now saying enough is enough.
Yeah, and I want to say too, to add on to that, is that it's really a shame that students that can't even vote yet have to, still in their time of grieving and of mourning, have to mobilize. And I say have to because they shouldn't have to, but they are. And I think that's they have come to the same realization that adults, in their eyes, I feel like they're saying that adults aren't doing enough. Thoughts and prayers aren't enough. Adults who have the capacity to vote aren't voting the way that they should have. Should be. And
I want to go to the flip side, actually, of companies. What about companies who are pushing for better safety equipment? I mean, I saw online recently bulletproof clipboards. Is that a step in the right direction, or is that, once again, fetishizing, like you said?
I would like them to look Emma Gonzalez in the face and ask them if they should have funded bulletproof clipboards, if that's what would have saved their friends. I want you to ask, survivors who live in our city who are victims and survivors of the shooting here on October 1st, and ask them if bulletproof clipboards were going to save them, or bulletproof, vests. That's not. I think that we're trying to accommodate a very violent narrative that has been going on in America for many, many years, and I feel like that's just a shortcut.
Carl?
Yeah, and I mean, as a gun violence survivor myself, I was a survivor from the 2014 Las Vegas shootings, where the Millers had walked into the Walmart and had barricaded themselves after shooting 2 officers at the CC's Pizza,
right.
and having to pull my family out of there while there was gunfire. I don't think that bulletproof clipboards would be the best alternative when it comes to addressing this issue that is continuously happening in the United States. So yeah, that's all that I have with bulletproof clipboards.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I think that you could offer such a unique perspective. Do you think that gun violence, gun culture is normalized in America?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I mean, my family, even my family as well, and many of my relatives own guns as well. I grew up in a childhood with guns around hunting rifles, around personal carry-on weapons, and personally, I even know personal family members that I love dearly that also do have a concealed carry. So coming from the perspective of being a survivor, I simply think that the best way into affecting change is creating legislative policy and reforming our policies when it comes to guns in America. And I mean, to answer the question even more specifically, is that I mean, we continuously normalize gun violence in America. I mean, it's just a shooting after shooting after shooting after shooting after shooting, and now it's enough. It really is enough, and we're seeing that with our youth.
It's been time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback off basically what he was saying. He mentioned, you mentioned sporting rifles. There was a video that went viral on Twitter recently of an 11-year-old girl receiving a gun as a birthday gift. She's crying because she's so happy. Is that normalizing it, or is that on the same equivalent of a parent getting their son or daughter a hockey stick or ice skates? Is it the same thing?
I think culture is very interesting because what you're talking about is culture. Culture, not just, talking about religion, but talking about just the culture, the media culture, the narrative that we're pushing, right? And I think that, I don't want to take your guns away, and I'm not an advocate of someone taking their guns away. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I also know that the Second Amendment wasn't created for people like me, a black woman. I don't think the people who wrote the Second Amendment were thinking to arm communities of color. And so I don't stand by the Second Amendment because it's not representative of people that I know that want to arm themselves. So, for example, the NRA. I'm sorry to divert, but the NRA is something that you brought up in the conversation, and the NRA doesn't protect people like me. The NRA didn't talk about anything about Felino Castile, who was shot, and who was someone who had a concealed weapon. You know what I mean? Who you can go find the clip yourself. Who said to the officer, "I have to tell you, I have a weapon in the car, and I have a permit." Before he even got a chance to show the man or his papers, he was dead. You know what I mean? The NRA, said we can't talk about ongoing investigations. We can't. And then, later on, the man had marijuana in his pocket, and he should have had his papers out already. I don't carry my papers out on my lap, already out, ready every single day for the rest of my life. Maybe I should. That's the NRA's logic, So I don't think that it's the narrative of, I don't want to take anyone's guns away, and I think that girl has every right to feel happy about it. I hope that her parents are doing their due diligence and teaching her about the importance of gun ownership, the importance of not harming people, and that hopefully that their mental health is stable and things that parents should be responsibly teaching their children.
Do you think that gun ownership specifically is glamorized in some parts of pop culture, whether that be video games, music, songs where, young adults and kids are listening to this music, watching these things, and it's being glamorized? Do you think that's an influence in it?
I think so. I think it has part to do with it. I think that, I don't know, it's an interesting question. I think yes, I do. Yeah. Cara, to elaborate.
No, yeah, and
I'll pass the question to you then.
Yeah, so we see it now in Hollywood, and we've seen it multiple times in Hollywood. I mean, when it comes to action TV shows, there are always guns or weapons, or we see it oftentimes our favorite protagonist is able to survive a bunch of bullets in his or her shoulder, and we're able to see how when it comes to weapons, and specifically like AR-15s and assault rifles, our favorite protagonists are able to utilize that. I guess I want to tag this specific thing where in Hollywood, a specific Hollywood actress, her name is, I believe, Liz Bourne from Elizabeth Keene from The Blacklist, and she had talked about the fact that America continuously fetishizes assault rifles and guns, and how she was making sure that her character in the future was not to have guns in her hand ever again.
Piggyback on that, I don't know if anyone's seen Black Panther recently. I saw it twice in one weekend, and one thing that I really want to know is the Black Panther, he has this bulletproof vest. His entire suit is bulletproof and kind of sorry, I'm not a geek, I'm not a Marvel
we love it
but his suit, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, it like kind of absorbs any hits and then uses his energy. And I thought that was really interesting because he's using lots of his manpower, but in normal movie culture, culture, we see, people with power and control, that equals gun, that equals weaponry, that equals, having a military behind you, a gang with tanks and things like that. And I think that is just, it's a very interesting flip of the narrative of having a superhero who is, who doesn't use weapons. He uses, a bulletproof vest. So I don't know.
No, that's definitely interesting. We love it. That was such a great movie, by the way. Carl, I want to go back to you. In response to a lot of these things, not only are they calling for legislators to make action, but a lot of students are planning on walkouts. Do you think that this is a step in the right direction, and do you think government will actually listen to it?
So I might be a little bit biased because I'm one of the lead organizers for the walkout here at UNLV. And doing a lot of community-based outreach, I think that walkouts would be the effective way when it comes to youth, saying that, enough is enough. And I know that many of my fellow student activists have even talked about having a sit-in, a protest. How about we have discussions in the classroom where we talk about gun violence and gun safety. And frankly, we've been doing that for years. We've been asking for our teachers, our professors, we've been asking for our parents, hey, how many times do we have to be worried about gun violence in our communities? Am I next? Who's next? Which community is next? And I think when it comes to this specific action, again, I might be biased, on March 14th, hosted by the Women's March across the whole entire country, there will be multiple attempts to having walkouts at elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and even college and university campuses. The one here at UNLV, March 14th, 10 a.m. It's going to be at the Alumni Amphitheater. And even when it comes to our own student activism efforts, like just the other day, we had heard that we would be at the Free Speech Zone doing this walkout, and we would be threatened by specific groups and making sure that our voices would not be heard, which is why we moved it to the Alumni Amphitheater, because of the fact that we're able to remove specific guests that are intimidating survivors and people who are attempting to tell their stories. So when it comes to walkouts that yield towards legislative action, I mean, specifically here in Nevada, we're inviting our elected officials to the walkout. And we would love to have people specifically here at this studio to love to come as well and probably cover the event too. And our elected officials standing with us, and even from both sides of the aisle, still listening to us and standing with us is so important. Fortunately, we have that privilege here in Nevada, but unfortunately in other states, they don't.
I'd also like to say a little plug in for the midterm elections that's coming up, and I want everyone who is able to vote, and I know voting is probably a little bit of a sensitive topic for some people, but the midterm elections are coming up, and I think this is for a lot of people their way of being heard. So midterm elections are focused, solely on our counties. You can vote for your representatives at this time. So voting in your midterm elections is super, super important. Like you mentioned elected officials, so I just thought about that. So
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you to our two panelists. We will be right back after this break. We are joined by freshman journalism major Alma Roma and biology major Cody Chris. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks.
I want to start with you, Alma. One of the biggest topics that comes up when we talk about gun violence, especially mass shootings, are the mentally ill. Do you think that mass shootings can be attributed to mentally ill people?
Well, we really have to think about the people who do commit these crimes, and I don't know, I feel like it's very important to really go into it and to go into detail with things like that, because it's important to be able to avoid it later on, because I feel like if we don't take care of our people, if we don't pay attention to how they're being treated, how they're growing up when they're in their lives, and it's like if we don't pay attention to that, then we're not going to prevent more violence in our country. So I feel like if we pay attention really close to mental illness, then we'll be able to help. We'll be able to prevent a lot more violence. And I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know what else to say.
Cody, your thoughts?
So it's important to note that as far as we know, according to the studies such as by the Annals of Epidemiology, that the percentage of people that are linked to mental illness and also with committing some kind of shooting, such as what we've seen in recent times, is only about 4%, which is pretty comparative to what we would normally find in the American population. And in terms of what we spend on mental health issues just in general in the United States, it's comparative with most other developed nations. So in terms of whether or not we're addressing mental illness generally in healthcare, whether or not that's something that's lacking, maybe that's something that we can talk about, but oftentimes we see that in terms of the legislature, there's not a lot of push to actually improve that spending. So maybe that is a solution, but apparently some people that say that that is the problem don't really seem to care to maybe rectify it. But aside from that, in terms of whether or not someone's mentally ill versus whether or not someone is troubled, say over some kind of period of time of tragedy or shortfalling, it's important that I suppose that we find some way of noticing signs that indicate someone is troubled and is suffering issues, such as actually sometime after Columbine, the U.S. Secret Service and the Department of Education had released a report kind of analyzing mass or just shootings, and specifically in schools, between like 1974 and about 2000, I think. And they found that that one of the things that was very common amongst people who would commit shootings, students specifically, was that other students wasn't entirely oblivious to that person potentially doing that, or that weren't entirely oblivious to that person being troubled or having signal that they were reaching out for some kind of help, whether it be through say saying things at school or anything that could, I guess, indicate that they were troubled in some way. And so yeah, we have to, I think, find ways to effectively vet those threats, or to find a way of finding out that someone is troubled and hitting them before it happens.
I would completely agree with that. Both of you guys actually mentioned that treatment of mentally ill and noticing signs especially is a big one. How can we make these signs more clear? How can we react to these signs? Because even with most shootings, we've seen that the shooter has made clear signs on social media and in person. They tell people. How can we make what's the solution to that? How can we help that?
I think we need to talk about this topic a lot more, and as we've noticed, unfortunately, with these events, like that's what's happening on social media now. You see on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, that people are talking about mental illness a lot more, and I feel like, unfortunately, it's because of the events, but I feel like that's important, and that's a good direction to go to talk about it more. And the more you talk about it, the more you see signs like that, like people posting threats and stuff on social media. People are going to start realizing what's going on, and maybe, like I said before, be able to prevent violence in the future. But like I said, it's just talking about it more. That's pretty much what we have to do. And I completely agree with Cody, because I know he mentioned that, so he made me think about that for a minute.
Would you agree with Alma saying that we need to talk about it more?
Yeah, well, it's always important to keep things in our purview and in our general discourse about these issues in general, right? One thing, for example, with the report I mentioned earlier by the Department of Education and the U.S. Secret Service was that they recommended that we try to within schools, try to break down the barriers in schools, specifically in the school social environment. Basically, the social barriers that would maybe make someone inclined to be discouraged, or someone who's discouraged from actually reporting things that they see. So we have to, I think, try to analyze how aspects about the social environment in schools are causing students to maybe not report things that they do see. And so, and then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, reaching out to students who seem troubled, trying to address their issues before they fester, if you would.
Yeah, kind of like the bystander effect. We see it happening. We see it on social media. We see it in public. Yet we don't do anything about it. And I feel like right now, if we really want to prevent these things, we have to say something, and we have to, keep our minds open with it.
A topic I want to move on to is open carry. Is open carry a right? Should we be able to do it?
I mean, I feel like there's a line that we shouldn't cross, so I feel like personally, we shouldn't be carrying around rifles. There's really no need for it. Okay, we're not in war right now. Like it's not a thing, But, I do get it. It's your Second Amendment right. You have the right to have it, but it's also in certain places. Like we can't have it in school. We can't go to Walmart grocery shopping and have a gun on you. I mean, that's kind of weird. Like there's no really necessary way to use it in some certain circumstances, but it just depends on where you at, the time and the moment. But I mean, yeah, like I said, there's a line, and we should just try as hard not to cross it.
Cody, do you think it's all right to have open carry?
Well, I mean, I think part of what that discussion kind of manifests out of is discussing what potential solutions there are to actually solving current issues with people that go specifically on campuses and shoot specifically, I guess, what's very common in not necessarily universities, but it also happens in universities, but oftentimes in the K through 12 schools. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense, I guess, that just simply allowing more people to have guns on campus is necessarily going to prevent something. This is oftentimes something that you hear as well, the good guy with the gun will stop the bad guy. Well, I mean, I think we all recognize that the, quote, bad guy is always going to have the heads up because he's going to be the one, or they, I should say, although statistically he, is going to be the one that's going to have the upper hand in terms of time, because if they're intending to do something, they're going to be able to draw the gun first than someone who's going to notice it before them. And so I don't really think that it's necessarily conducive to trying to solve the issues just by increasing the overall gun ownership or gun carrying, because just statistically speaking, there's a very strong positive correlation between gun ownership and gun violence in per capita. And actually the residual is such that the United States is actually above that trend line. And so statistically, I just don't really see why we should assume that just increasing gun ownership will just lead to somehow shooters that do exist, or potential shooters that do exist, are simply just going to not be successful.
Very quickly, one last thing. Sentence or less, would you be okay if UNLV had an open carry policy?
No, it would make me feel very uncomfortable. I wouldn't feel safe at all. I would much rather be safe with bulletproof clipboards, if anything. But you know, that's just me.
All right, Cody, one sentence or less.
One sentence or less.
Yes.
I would say that I don't particularly find it useful, and as such, I don't see any reason for it, and we should have good reasons for doing something, and so I would say no.
Well, that is our time. Thank you to Alma Romo and Cody Chris for joining us. If you want to stay up to date with us, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. As always, my name is Sarah Coker. Thank you for joining us.